I'm joined by the director of Good Madam, Mlungu Wam, Jenna Bass, and also the co-writer, Babalwa Baartman, and one of the stars of the film playing Tsidi, Chumisa Cosa. Welcome, and Jenna, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's so wonderful to be back, Tiff.
I am so glad to be speaking with you today about this remarkable film, Good Madam. I want to begin with this brilliant idea that's at the heart of the movie. And I want to ask both of you, Babalwa and Jenna, how did you come up with the premise for Good Madam, and how did you collaborate on writing the screenplay?
I think we're going to probably do this a lot throughout the Q&A, which is like, who's going to answer? So, do you want to say something first, or should I? Okay. Well, it was originally an idea in that I think, I love genre films, and I really love horror films, especially because when I was younger, I was too scared to watch them. So it's like the one genre of film that is still quite new for me, and that there's so many movies that I still had to discover. And watching them, I kind of like struck me. It was just how I felt that so many of the things that I found horrifying about the world that I lived in were not represented in horror films, like inequality and structural oppression. And horror films weren't about that. They were about, monsters chasing people and things like that. So wanting to make a film within that genre that tackled something that was very close to home in that way. And I've been working with Babalwa for a while, and we throw ideas around a lot at each other, and we've been working together for some time and really enjoy doing so. And I told her the kind of idea of the kind of premise of the story, and it kind of went from there. But this also this film was written in a very collaborative way. It was also written with the cast, who do a lot of improv in the film, which you've just seen.
Mm-hmm. And Babalwa, what was your entry into creating this screenplay that became Good Madam?
God. So when Jenna approached me, it was really easy. It was such a easy concept to grab onto. And like she said, we've worked together before, and we seem to share the same, values and the same views when it comes to the current affairs around us and in our country. I think what drew me the most in the story, or at least when we, over time as we had discussed it, was exploring the relationship between the three generations of these women, who have been impacted by this past. And it's something that is still so relatable in this day and age. And seeing, and being able to develop young Winnie's character, Chumisa's character, and Mavis's character, and seeing that at the end of the day, the struggle is still the same, nothing really changes much. It's something that hits home for a lot of us, and it's a conversation we have all the time as South Africans, at least especially within our generation. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that was one of the things that really drew me into the story, and the layer that I was very passionate about focusing on.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask both of you, how did you find Chumisa to play Tsidi? And for you, Chumisa, what did you do to turn the words on the page in the screenplay into the living, breathing character that we see on screen? Maybe I'll start with you, Jenna.
So we held a casting process, and like one of my previous films, High Fantasy, we did it in a similar way, in that we had a rough outline for a story, and we had a rough outline of characters, and from then we wanted to start casting and seeing who was the right fit for the film, and then build the character around them and the experience that they brought and the ideas that they had. So we had I would say, like, it was relatively specific picture, like mental picture of who this character was or could be, but at the same time, it was still quite open. And so when we met Chumisa, just what she brought to the role was just like, it just added a whole other layer that we wouldn't have otherwise have probably been able to do ourselves. And that was what was so important, is that, we were bringing in someone who was going to add something that we didn't have ourselves. Mm-hmm. And from then, it was a very collaborative process, which Chumisa can maybe speak more to.
So let's hear from you, Chumisa. What do you think you added to the character that wasn't on the page? What were you bringing?
It's as Babalwa was saying. It's more not necessarily a lived experience, but it's what I've seen in society, and I've kind of inherited. So it's memories, it's the community I've grown up in, you know. So the story was very relatable to me, as much as there were parts of it that weren't, because I didn't have a mother who was a domestic worker who under those conditions. However, I've seen people like that. I've had friends like that. So it was really experience and knowing that world, and yeah, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of lended my voice to the whole process.
So this might be a bit of a strange question, but I wonder if there is something that we draw on, even if we didn't directly experience domestic labor or working in service, that comes from some family memory, something physical that we can draw on. I know my own family has many women who worked in domestic labor, and I wonder if, although you didn't experience it yourself, Chumisa, if there was something you were drawing on, and maybe I'll ask you, Babalwa, as well.
Okay. Yes, definitely. It's a memory. It's there's, as I've grown older, there's just certain lessons that, for instance, I would have gotten from my grandmother, where I'm like, I understand now that this was not like certain rules that were made for survival, for instance, you know, that were not just because this is how one would rather live. I remember in the story, this is not as related, but there's a scene where, with the tablecloths, myself and Winnie are talking about tablecloths, and that actually was my grandmother, like, who was very, very fussy about, this is how, very specific about how you wash the tablecloth. It can't, as soon as you're done at the table, you clear everything up so that there's no stains and stuff like that, you know. It may be a simple example, but it's a legacy of how one would try and offload as much labor as possible, because as soon as the madam eats, you know, they're the ones who are responsible for washing everything. So you know that if anything there stains, I'm the one who's responsible for, like, making sure that there's no, just things like that, you know, in the physical. There's also, like, just memories that are just ingrained in your DNA that you can't really articulate in your words.
Mm-hmm. And Babalwa?
I mean, for the most part, I would say I agree with Chumisa. It being in the house and observing the work, and I think also the conversations while Jenna and I were writing, and when she would express, you know, what Madam would want from this situation, it also reminded me of my grandmother, you know, and the specificness of everything, you know, the precision with every single household chore, and how that was passed on. And how you are raised to believe that you are being taught this, you know, in order to be ladylike, but then feeling like on some level you were probably being groomed for, you know, a similar position in life, you know, to take on a similar position, whether you were aware of it or not. And even when I speak to my mother, you know, I mean, I was lucky enough to have a different upbringing. But my mother and my aunt had days where they would go to work, you know, with my mom. So there's a lot of with my grandmother, sorry, there's a lot of similarity there. But I think while we were making the film, I had no choice but to completely remove myself from it. Because when Jenna and I had a workshop with Omama, who were domestic workers, it felt, there was a time where it felt like we were putting on so much onto them, wanting to feed some anger, you know, wanting them to respond a certain way to that situation. And they just did not budge, you know. This was our life. We were happy with this. And it kind of informed the way we approached even Mavis and Tsidi's relationship, that you see everything wrong with this life, but the person who has lived this life is not willing to acknowledge, you know, anything sinister about it. And I struggled with that for quite a while, but I also had to be realistic in the sense that, well, who am I, you know, to want them to feel bad about a life that they have lived, that they have clearly accepted. So it's, yeah, I guess that was the biggest journey for me, as far as just having to accept that people who have lived that life and have lived that past have come to terms with it, and they have worked their way through it. And maybe our generation needs to we need to look into ourselves as to how we approach, these topics, and not have to force anger, onto people that have moved past that life. So, yeah.
That is such an important insight. Thank you for that. I want to ask you and Jenna as well about where Good Madam fits within South African cinema. We've seen many films from South Africa that deal with the country's racial dynamics, but I feel like something changes when you put women at the center of the story, which most of those other films do not. So I want to ask, and Jenna, I know this has been something that's been a passion of yours for years over many films, but when you're dealing with the racial dynamics in South Africa through film, and it is about women first, what changes for you?
Wow. It's really interesting because from my perspective, because I'm actually working on something at the moment where it was about a group of people in South Africa, and then I had the kind of idea that actually what if they were just all women, and suddenly the whole dynamic of the story completely changed. So I'm almost not sure how to answer the question, because I feel like I'm actually working through it at the moment because it is really complex. But yeah, I think for this film, I think it is so much about the things that Chumisa and Babalwa both mentioned, of this idea of generational trauma and how it is passed down, in these women specifically from generation to generation. And it's not this thing that even if you try and remove yourself from it, it's something that you literally sucked from your mother. It's not something that you can just distance yourself from. And that's something I guess I identify with as well. Yeah, I'm sorry. It's a very deep question you just asked, so I'm still actually processing it. But I don't know if you want to is there anything that you want to add to that?
I want to hear the question again.
The question is about dealing with South Africa's racial dynamics through film, as many films have done, but using the lens of women's experience as separate from a general or a male experience. What changes?
What changes? I'm not sure if it changes anything, but I do know in this country, it's not anything that's unique. Even as we speak now, we are in what we call Women's Month, where we acknowledge the role that women have, South African women have played in the racial politics. And I know when we have conversations, we can't, when we speak of oh mama, Winnie Madikizela, that's at the core of change in this country. It's South African women are powerful, have always been at the forefront, and have never really come forward, and taken the glory for it. So I don't know if it answers the question, but it felt like a very natural thing for me. And I think that, and even this subject matter is so true to what this country is about. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. But
yeah, it's a really hard question to answer, because it's I don't want to be I'm avoiding it. It's just that it's everything changes and nothing changes. It's still about things. I think the main thing that is affected by it is the fact that you're automatically, you're most likely going to be telling an untold story, because the stories have, up until this point been so male dominated, or so I suppose, gender blind, to our history. So, I think it immediately means that you're telling a story with a new kind of nuance that maybe it's not better, or it's just something that hasn't been as uncovered, as delved into as, maybe other stories have.
The last thing I want to ask you is about genre and the location of films. Here in North America, we're likely going to see Good Madam and find echoes of Get Out or Night of the Living Dead or other films that have used the horror genre and horror tropes to explore class and race. I imagine the situation in South Africa in terms of how people will receive the film is very different. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the genre elements might play out in South Africa as opposed to what you imagine will come in North America, when I hope everybody here sees it as well.
I'm not, I think the main difference will be that South African audiences will kind of I think there's certain universal layers to the film which I think are kind of understandable anyway, and then there's I know as the case with South African films, I find, but I'm sure it's the case with any kind of national cinema, is that there's 1,000 other layers that you will only really kind of tap into and appreciate if you are from this place, just because life here and anywhere else is just so complicated and layered, but definitely here we can speak from experience. But I think the kind of main difference, that it's actually something that happened that was a big inspiration for me for making this film, was when Get Out opened globally and in South Africa, a lot of people went really crazy for it. As you can imagine, it was a really really important film, and I remember someone telling me that they went to see the film, and when towards the climax, everyone was screaming get out, to Daniel Kaluuya, get out. And I just remember being really struck by that, because in our context, the idea of get out, who are you saying that to? You're not saying that to the Black population. You're saying that to the white minority, and get out. We want to exercise this history that we have. And I just suddenly, I think, I wouldn't say it was that gave me the idea for the film, but it was a big moment of what does that story look like here? And what is that, here it's not about people running away, it's about actually reclaiming. It's a different kind of, it was a similar story, but it was turned on its head in our context. So don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of a story that made an impact on me.
It does. Thank you. Anything you'd like to add, Babalwa or Chumisa?
Chumisa?
Okay. No, I think I echo. I would echo what Jenna said. It's really, it's kind of a similar story, but very different, because it is about reclaiming. It's about a people that were removed from what's theirs, trying to get back to themselves or to theirs. Yeah.
It's a different kind of survival. It's it is still a survival story, but it's in a totally different context.
And also, I think another thing is, when it comes to our country and having to face difficult topics such as this one, we make a joke out of everything. Every time we are hit with certain traumas, we have come to respond in a way where we turn it into a joke. We find the humor in it all, and it's kind of become the language amongst us. Whether we are on Twitter, etc. So when we made this film, I remember saying to Jenna that I really just want to see what the reaction is going to be here at home, because it doesn't give you a chance, to laugh it away. Your everyday life becomes this horrific event. So I'm just really interested to see what the conversations will be around this, because I just feel like there's very little room for us to just brush this under the carpet and and laugh at it like we typically tend to do when we have to have these difficult conversations.
Mm-hmm.
People will laugh, though, I think.
Babalwa Baartman, Chumisa Cosa, and director Jenna Bass, thank you so much, and thank you for making Good Madam and bringing it to the Toronto Film Festival.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Of course.
Appreciate it. Thank you.